The action was entirely devised by an organisation called Students for a Free Tibet, and I was there as a representative of Students for a Free Tibet. Because there had been about 80 people involved in all of the different actions that had taken place, and all of the actions had been devised properly with a lot of skill and a lot of hard work and a lot of, devotion into trying to work out how they could be done. I kept a reasonably low profile for the first, I'd say the first week, the first 10 days. I was just sort of scouting around and looking at what was happening. So I had never met the three guys who did the protest. They arrived as a group of three and I arrived on my own, and we met up when we were there and the action took place. My whole reason for being there was to talk to journalists and to tell journalists about the story and what was going on and what we were doing, and to be the person who, when protesters were picked up, I would be there to give interviews. Between us, we all were trying to work out what we could possibly do, and we'd come up with this idea that the bird's nest was always the best backdrop because it was at night, because it was such a beautiful building and it was so recognisable. And we didn't have time to make any more banners, so the only thing that there was left to do was to use the Tibetan flags that we had. And we had already come up with an idea of using the rangs and fist, basically, the salute that was used by the Black Panthers at the Olympics so many years ago. We literally met up walking past each other in the street. They arrived from one direction and I arrived from another direction. And we were both on phones to colleagues of ours who were trying to tell us how we could meet up together. And we literally walked past each other and realised who each other were. So I turned around and followed them and tried to guide them of where the best place and where we had already told journalists to go to be able to take some photographs. So they got there and started setting up, and I stood back slightly on the phone to our Students for Free Tibet colleagues, telling them about what was going on so that they could put all of the information into a press release and get it out, at the same time as trying to take some photographs. And it was a deliberate, connection with the fact that the Black Panther salute had happened all of those years ago, and that itself had been such an iconic moment, and we were definitely tying the two together. Yeah. I was standing directly in front of where the guys were doing the protest, and two policemen, plainclothes policemen, came up on the side of me and had one arm each, and it was then that they were grabbing my belongings to take them away from me. And then somebody stood in front of me so that I couldn't see what was going on, because we were on slightly different levels. They were on a higher road and I was on a lower road. Basically they just took my arms and they took my bag and they took all of my things, and they had my camera taken away from me and my telephone, or both of my telephones, and my computer, and then we were all bundled into different cars. The three of them were bundled in together into the back of one police van, and I was taken away in another unmarked police car. The first interrogation I had 6 uniformed police. I had 3 ununiformed police. I had 2 people filming on video cameras, and I had 2 people filming with still cameras, all in the same room. And out of those people, sort of 3 people were asking me questions. And the interrogation got harder and harder, and the questions got more taxing, and they wanted more detailed information about who we were and who we knew and who had organised the protest. And then again, that interrogation took about 7 hours, the second one. It was quite long. And then they took us back into a room all together again, and left us in there for quite a long time, and we weren't allowed to talk to each other even though we were in the same room. And then they sentenced us, a policeman came in and said, "Oh, we've sentenced you to 10 days in prison for taking part in this protest." And it was at that point that I did get scared, because I suddenly realised that, all of my rights had been taken away from me. I hadn't had a lawyer, I hadn't had any legal advice, I hadn't had a court case, I hadn't been able to put forward my point of view, and I was suddenly going to be taken to a Chinese prison, of which I knew nothing about and really wasn't that prepared for. But the four of us also still thought, maybe it's not true, maybe actually they're going to drive us to the airport and put us on a plane. So when they took us into the back of the police van, we were all looking out the window and talking to each other about what direction we thought we were driving, and did we recognise anything, and had we been this way before. And after about 10 or 15 minutes of driving, it really did dawn on us that we weren't going anywhere near the airport, and they were actually taking us somewhere where we knew we didn't want to be. So eventually we arrived at the detention centre, and it was the middle of the night on the second day by this point. So by this point we'd been awake for 48 hours, and they took us into the detention centre and locked us in sort of like a holding cell. Then we thought they would take us to the cell and we would be allowed to go to sleep. But what they actually did was split us all up again and take us for even more interrogation, even though we hadn't slept for at least 48 hours. And this interrogation really was quite difficult this time. They had us in very small cages, so my knees were virtually touching the front of the cage, so the cage was here and went round me, and in that cage was a silver metal chair into which I was strapped. So I had a big metal bar which was padlocked me to the chair. So I hadn't slept for 48 hours. I was strapped to a metal chair in a cage, and I had a very official and officious Chinese policeman interrogate me about every single person that I knew in the Tibet movement. I think before you've been kept awake for that amount of time, you think not having sleep isn't really a form of torture. It isn't until you've actually been in that situation that you realise how awful it is, because it sends you slightly delirious. You become, it's really, physically, it's really, really painful to be awake, and mentally you sort of seem to lose the ability to be able to function. So your brain feels as though it's somewhere else. It's sort of not actually in your body, and it's not working in the way it's supposed to be. So imagining what it's like to be kept awake for a week, and then, on top of the sleep deprivation torture that they use in China, they also make you do physical exercise whilst in that state of exhaustion, which you just can't imagine. You just can't imagine. You see why people collapse and aren't able to do anything. But no one knew anything, and all of the Americans were deported together at the same time. It wasn't until we got on the plane, as soon as we got on the plane, I turned my phone on and made a call to our colleagues and said, we're on the plane, we're on our way home. And it was then that they told us that this fantastic photograph had come out, because until then we were actually all quite despondent to a certain degree, because we thought we'd gone to all of these pains and troubles and put our family through such, you know, terrible, worrying times by being in prison, and we thought we'd got nothing from it. We didn't think we had a photograph, we didn't think there had been any press. We didn't realise there were these huge stories about us, you know, going around the world, and that this amazingly iconic photograph had come out. So we were suddenly overjoyed. He even more than I, because being half Tibetan, his biggest depression from the whole thing was the thought that he had jeopardised his opportunity of ever being able to go and visit Tibet. And when I told him that this fantastic photograph had come out and everybody thought it was the best photo of the whole Olympic protests, he was just over the moon, and it was really nice to see. It was great. I'm glad I did it. You know, I was asked a lot when I came home, would you do it again? Was it worth it? And it was so worth it. You know, it was so worth it because the publicity for the cause of Tibet was huge because of it. And I would do it again because I still believe very strongly that, you know, people need to stand up and they need to be counted, and they need to be able to say, I support Tibet and I believe that what China is doing is wrong. So I would definitely do it again. I would definitely do it again. Yeah.